The first thing we have to do in planking the upper deck is to make up the gratings. And I have two videos on how this is done. The first one was done in June 2017, where I described 3 different methods of making them up. And the second one is video 57 in this build, where I actually showed you what I did using the pre-axle to make the gratings in the lower deck. And while we are on the topic of sliding tables, this is the pre-act sliding table that I bought from Charlie Files when I was accumulating my tools 15 plus years ago. If you don't have it, you might find you can pick it up on the aftermarket or maybe on some club forum. You might put an appeal if you're a member of the National Trust and see if you can't pick up one of these. If not, you certainly could make one up. I haven't made a jig for this, but the same way I made a jig for the Jim Byrnes, you could make a jig, and you just have to figure out how to clamp it in place. I have a whole video on making up the sliding table, so if you're interested, you can go there. But if you find that that's a bit too challenging for you, my suggestion is to go directly to Jim. This saw is without question one of the best tools in my workshop, as good as the Sherline or the Cameron drill press. And when I see the quality of the workmanship he's done here, although I haven't used his sliding table, I can assure you it would be equally as good. And then all you need to do is make up a little jig like this, and you could produce grills at the same accelerated rate as I do. So let's get into how we actually make up these grates. We're going back to the book, and we're going to look at how the book suggests we make up the gratings. And what I've done is this time I'm going to make them on the Jim Byrnes. This is my sliding table, and this is a little jig that I've made up that allows me to make the gratings very easy. In this jig, we'll put a plank of wood, which is the exact same thickness as the thickness of the blade. I've set this particular one up for 2 3/4 inch squares. I had actually set this up to cut smaller squares before, and I had to take it out. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to make these permanent and make a series of them, so I'll have different ones for different size gratings. And so what we can do is we put a cut on our blank, and that cut will slide right over on the piece, and so I can keep moving it down without doing all those gymnastics that I did with the pre-act. It really makes it extremely simple. The first thing I'm going to do is I've made up a series of juniper blanks. Again, you want to use hardwood, harder the better. And on that, you may see it, I have put the arrow on which the grain is going. That's going to help us determine exactly where the cut was going to be made. The next thing we know is we need to check for squareness on the piece. I can see that these blanks are off square, so I'm going to have to straighten them all out on the Jim Byrnes first. Again, tightening up my little screws, I line it up square against the board, and I can see that's a perfect square. And then just to make sure I don't make an error, because you know I'm famous for making errors, I'm going to just put a little line which says this is the side that's been squared. And now we just do the same thing with all of them. The first thing we do is make the first cut on the piece. And we must be cutting the slots in the opposite direction of the grain, so that when we come to cut the pieces, or I call them biscuits, off, the grain is running the length of the piece. So we push this right up against the little stock that we've put in place, and we make our first cut. And there we have it. It's parallel to the piece. It's at 90 degrees. We can check it if you wanted to. So it's perfectly square. So now this slot will fit over. And push it down and make sure that it's square against the block. Take it off, and there is the second piece. And in my case, I've made the square slightly larger, 0.65 instead of 0.065 instead of 0.057. Now you could make it the exact same thickness of the blade. I've chosen to make it a little thicker. So it's not going to be absolutely square. If you wanted to adjust the thickness to reduce it, what you'd do is you'd slide it down this edge here, between this edge and the edge of the blade. So this determines the space that you're going to leave on the piece. And now all we're going to do is cut the rest of these things, taking our time. And the most important thing is that these you can mix them up together, so you can actually line up another piece, and you'll see that all the slots line up together. So when we finish, we have 5 more. All of these pieces will be identical. Now we're going to cut the biscuits off. So we've set this at the same thickness as the square and use this as a sample and make sure we get it right. So we just do a test. That is perfect. I had to change the Thor, take the carbide tip blade out because it was really damaging the pieces. It was a little too aggressive. So I put a slitting saw in, which is also thinner, so you'll get more pieces out. And the other thing that I found I needed to do was to raise the height, so the blades would just cut it and you didn't have all the blades running along it. As you get closer to the end, safety tip, you need to have a support board at the back. So it's slightly less efficient. And you leave the last piece. You got 21 pieces. We'll keep going. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 more, each with 21 pieces. We need 12 groove pieces to make up each grate, and then the buttons that'll fit inside. So let's start the assembly. We take 4 pieces out, 4 good pieces, and simply assemble them, preferably in the same order. You'll see that in the case of this, there's a clean back and there's one short, so we want to make sure that we're lining them up with in a similar way. Right, so now we've got the first square in. We want to make sure that that's square. This is just to help us stick the first set square. So a little bit of thin CA, and we hold that in place and simply put a little thin CA to lock that in place. Wait a few seconds and do the next one on the other side. Make sure you're keeping it square. And spin it around. I find it's very good to do this on glass, as it's easy if it sticks to the glass to come apart. And the last one. Make sure it's also flat down on the glass. And we just give that a minute for it to cure. That's just really holding it together. And again, you'll see that it's a proper square. Now we're just going to fill in the pieces. So we see that little piece that's hooked over there. So we're going to want to put them in the same direction. And now all we're going to do is fit these pieces in. If you've cut them the correct thickness, you get a nice tight fit. And there you've got it flat, and we still have quite a few pieces left over, which is always useful because not 100% of these are going to come out correct. Although I have to say this time, I think it's only 3 or 4 out of 200 were bad. And again now, just a little more thin CA, and we're now just going to stick this. You could use PVA. I just want to lock it in place. So again, what you want to make sure is that the grating is flat, because otherwise it can stick with a twist. We spin it around, and we do the same thing now on the other side. And she's done. This is one we done 3-4 minutes ago, and this is ready for battens now. The depth of the batten doesn't matter. It's better to have it a little higher than too low. In the book, David suggests you use watered down PVA glue to stick the piece. I just want to make sure this thing sticks properly. So I just put full strength PVA and wiped off any excess really before I put it in the grid itself. And I didn't have any problems, so I'm going to stick to that method. Just going back to remind you why we're making the gratings now, is this goes back to some advice that Greg gave based on the first video I made on making grates, is that if you make up the frame now, which I'll need to put on the model, and then try to fit the grating afterwards, you're going to find you're not going to get a perfect fit. It's going to fit in an odd way, and it'll just be 2/1000 of an inch out. So his recommendation was to make up the grating first, then put the frame around it, and then install both on the model. That way you'll get a perfect looking frame and grill every time. So that's the purpose of doing it this way. So we'll see you in our next video when we start the planking. Keep modeling.